The New Jersey Devils keep finding ways to win and competing in the Metropolitan Division. Trey Matthews of Locked On Devils is here to talk about that, their slow starts to some games, and what it'll take for them to compete the rest of the way. All that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On New Jersey Devils, Trey Matthews. And Trey, 2 in a row now for the Devils. They do just keep on winning and competing in that Metropolitan Division. What has been the biggest difference this year as compared to last year for these Devils?
There's a whole lot of things you can point to, but I think the biggest thing is that Sheldon Keefe is really clicking with the players and he's utilizing them to the best of their abilities. A big example that I talked about in one of my more recent episodes is that he's entrusting Jack Hughes in more penalty kill situations. Now, when you think of Jack Hughes, you don't think of him on the PK or being a help defensively, but that's exactly what Sheldon Keefe is trying to do. He's trying to elevate Jack Hughes' game, take it to the next level. And after the game, Sheldon Keefe spoke highly of the trust he has in Jack, and it was reciprocal on Jack's end. I think that's just the biggest example of the chemistry being really good, the trust being there, the system being in play. Devils got off to a slow start to the season, but that was bound to happen because they brought in a lot of players to try to shake up the roster, new head coach, new system. Obviously, you got to start a new goalie in Jakob Markstrom. The Devils are just starting to click. And I think the biggest thing from this year compared to last year is that they at least walk away with something more times than not. So you talked about them winning 2 in a row, but let's go back to the Toronto Maple Leafs game back on Tuesday. They lost in OT. Austin Matthews had a game-winning goal, but at least they walked away with something.
And those points do add up. As someone who covers the Islanders, I am well aware of how, those overtime and shootout losses can add up. You talked about Jakob Markstrom. What impact has the improved goaltending had on the Devils this season?
I just want to say this. I think Jakob Markstrom deserves a lot more respect because let's just look at last season, the tandem of Vitek Vanecek and Akira Schmid and Nico Dawes every now and again. It wasn't really all that good. And it really started to change when Fitzy brought in Jake Allen at the trade deadline. That's when the Devils' goaltending started to improve. And I think people are very spoiled by the fact that the Devils have better goaltending, that when they don't have a good outing, they're just like, oh, they're bad, or they're not really all this or that. I'm just like, Jakob Markstrom is second in the NHL in wins. Take it how you want to take it, but that's not an easy thing to do. And yes, he lets in a few soft goals here or there, but look, I all wins count the same in the end. So if the Devils win 3-1, I really don't care if they get a shutout. I really don't. And that might be a hot take, but at least on my end, I care more about getting the 2 points than I do getting the shutout. And I think Jakob Markstrom has done a phenomenal job. It's not perfect, but it's a work in progress. And I even said it that I'm glad that he's representing Team Sweden in Four Nations. I was talking to Haley Simon of Locked On Blues about this when we collaborated on a respective crossover. I was just like, look, I think Jakob Markstrom deserves some more recognition, and I think he's having a pretty good year. Why not have him represent Team Sweden at the Four Nations face-off?
Yeah, and definitely that is a good thing. and some recognition for him. One thing this team has struggled with a little bit in some games recently is slow starts, falling behind a little bit early. What's been going on with that, and how are they going to try to address that?
It's really hard. We tried asking Sheldon Keefe that question a couple days ago, but the reality of it is like, it's just a matter of circumstance, but how you respond, that's what makes a team. So the Devils were notoriously known for sacrificing the first goal last year more times than not. And unfortunately, it resulted in many losing streaks, like losing 3 in a row or being very inconsistent. So, but this time around, they're able to come back. And in the previous game against the Chicago Blackhawks, they went down 1-0. And then in the third period, they caught lightning in a bottle. It was an onslaught of goals. Just great, fast-paced hockey like we love to see. So, I mean, as long as they can amount the comeback and just say, look, we're down, but we're not out. Like I said, similar to the shutout thing, I don't think it's that big a deal, but even Sheldon Keefe doesn't really have an answer to that.
One guy who I think doesn't get enough attention for what he adds to the lineup is Jasper Bratt. And every time I've watched the Devils, he just has a really good game. He's always seemingly productive and in the thick of things. Talk to me about what he's meant to this team so far this year.
That's an excellent point, Gil. Like, people talk about Jack Hughes and Nico Hischier, but I feel as though Jasper Bratt is one of the more underrated players in the NHL, because take a guess. Who do you think is leading the Devils in points? It's not Jack Hughes. It's Jasper Bratt.
Yeah.
Who's leading the Devils in assists? It's Jasper Bratt. And he's second on the team in goals, 3-way tie with Jack Hughes and Stefan Noesen. I don't think anyone had that on their bingo card, Stefan Noesen being second on the Devils in goals, but digressing a little bit. Jasper Bratt, for the past couple seasons, has been really good and consistent. He plays in all the games. He plays with great speed. I don't understand why he can't get more recognition. He was named an all-star last year. He got to represent the Devils at the all-star game, albeit it was to replace the injured Jack Hughes, but it still shouldn't take away from the fact that he is a really good player and deserves more recognition. And a few years ago, he bet on himself to take a one-year deal and show to the front office, like, my one good year was not a fluke. I am very capable of doing it again. And case in point, he did it again. Now he's locked up long-term. So my thing is, yes, Jasper Bratt definitely deserves some more recognition, if you ask me.
We're getting closer to the midpoint of this NHL season. What do you think the Devils are going to look to do as we get closer to the trade deadline?
I think they just need some more depth on their bottom six, because there are times where they're just a little too top heavy. But Nathan Bastian recently came back into the lineup after being out because he had his jaw bashed in by Ryan Lomberg in a not so fair fight. But Curtis Lazar is also out for an extended period of time, but he's back to practicing. And I said, losing those two players, while they don't contribute the most, they definitely add you a couple more bodies. So it's going to be interesting to see. Like, I was speaking to Chico Resch about this. I'm sure a fellow you're very familiar with, former Islanders player, former Stanley Cup champion as well. I asked Chico, I was like, do you think they're Stanley Cup contenders? He thinks like they're definitely going to go to the playoffs if all goes well, barring anything catastrophic happening. But are they there in terms of being championship contenders? Maybe not yet, but they're very close. And I think, at least on my end, maybe getting some more scoring on your bottom six can help just a little bit more. We saw that with the Stefan Noesen, Eric Haula, and Paul Cotter line. But Stefan Noesen, more times than not, he's going to be paired alongside Nico Hischier. He deserved that promotion. And now, like I said, Sheldon Keefe is trying anything he can to just give that bottom six some more pop.
All right, that'll be something to keep an eye on as we head closer and closer to that trade deadline. Trey, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
You can find me at TreyMat4 on Twitter or X, whatever you call it. You can find Locked On Devils wherever you get your podcast from. Both available on podcast streaming services and also YouTube.
All right, Trey, thanks so much.
Thank you, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at Game Time. Game Time is focused on togetherness this holiday season. That means when you bring people together at live events, the experience is that much better, and it's the perfect gift. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. My favorite feature on Game Time is the view from your seat. You go on the app and you can see a panoramic view from your seat before you purchase the tickets, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time.